Now that you've sorted your balls by weight, you've chosen the granulation of powder to begin with, you've selected a ball size and a patch material to start with, you're ready to go to the range and start testing your powder charge. Choose a paper target that you can see well and aim consistently at. Place it between 25 and say 50 yards. It isn't necessary that your rifle be sighted in to hit the bullseye. All that you really need is to keep all 5 shots on the paper. Now, I prefer to shoot 5-shot groups because I believe it gives me more information than a 3-shot group would. So fire a fouling shot. Choose a powder charge weight to begin with. I think a good place to start is with a charge weighting grain that is equal to the bore of the rifle. For example, in a 50 caliber rifle, I typically start with 50 grains of powder. I load that. I use a patch that I lubricate with either saliva or some of my cleaning solution. I prefer the moose milk for this. Seat that load down on your powder charge. Place the rifle on your sandbags and fire it on that paper target. Wipe your bore once, reload with the same amount of powder, and shoot it another shot on target. Do that for 5 shots. Then take that target down and write on it the amount of powder that you shot with that target with. Post a new target, increase the powder charge by 5 grains, and then shoot another 5-shot group on that target, remembering to wipe the bore between shots, and continue to do this until you reach the maximum recommended load by your rifle's manufacturer. When you've completed this and you look at those targets, just choose the one with the best group, and there you've written on that target what the powder charge is that your rifle is going to shoot most accurately. Now go down range and pick up as many of your fired patches as you can find. Look them over, and what you will see is a black ring with some scorching in the middle. And as you study these patches, if you notice any cuts or tears, or if the patch is shredded, those are all indications that your patching material is too thin for that ball and that rifle. When you look at the back side of the patch, the side that was in contact with the ball, if you notice any burning through in the area where the patch and the ball were in contact, that's also a sign that that patching is too thin. What causes that is the patch is not thick enough to grip the ball, and the ball slips free of the patch before it exits the muzzle. If you see any of those indicators, that patch is much too thin, and you need to try thicker patching. Now, you can purchase pre-cut patches in different thicknesses, say 10 thousandths, 15 thousandths, even maybe up to 18 thousandths. But the better way to find the right size patching is to go to the fabric store with your dial micrometer and measure different samples of fabric. What you're looking for is 100% natural materials. It could be cotton or it could be linen. This ticking is a very commonly used fabric for pitching, for patches in muzzle loaders. Now, if I measure this ticking with my micrometer, you place it between the anvil and the piston. And then using the ratcheting part of the handle, tighten down on it until the ratchet slips. That ratcheting device ensures that you're putting the same pressure on the anvil and piston every time. Now, reading the measurement on this fabric, I see that it measures 15 thousandths. But this isn't the measurement we need to be concerned with. The measurement that is critical to accuracy is the measurement of that fabric when it's compressed. To get an idea of what that will be, I will grasp the handle of my micrometer in a place where it doesn't ratchet with my index finger and my thumb. And I'll tighten that down as tight as I can using only my thumb and my index finger. Now I get a reading of 6/1000ths of an inch. Why is this important? Well, it's because the thickness of that fabric when it's compressed between the ball and the lands in your rifle is the measurement that's critical to accuracy. Now, I could measure another piece of ticking that may look identical to this, and I may still get an uncompressed measurement with the ratchet of 15/1000ths, but when I compress it down, it may measure 10/1000ths or even 11/1000ths. So how can that be? Well, the compressed thickness of the fabric will vary depending on the size of the threads that the fabric is woven from, or even the tightness of the weave. For example, if a piece of fabric has more threads per inch, it's going to compress less than the fabric that has fewer threads. So it's the compressed measurement that you want to be observant of. Now, I will go to the fabric store and I'm going to be looking for fabrics that measure 1 to 2/1000ths of an inch thicker when compressed than the patching material that I began with. And then I will look at other bolts of fabric, say maybe cotton drill or twill, and I'm looking for something that will measure 1 to 2/1000ths of an inch thicker than the first sample I chose. I'll continue doing this, looking for fabrics that will each in succession measure 1 to 2/1000ths of an inch thicker. I've even gone up to denim that when compressed will measure between 20 and 22/1000ths of an inch. So once I've found those fabrics, I will buy the least amount of fabric material that they will sell, which is usually 1/8 of a yard. I'll cut a strip of it just a little bit wider than the muzzle of my barrel, and I'll take all these fabrics back to the range. I'll set up and start with the thinner of those fabrics. I'll post another target. I'll lubricate that fabric with either saliva or my moose milk, and I'll load my best powder charge with the balls I've sorted by weight and size, and I'll shoot a 5-shot target with that patching fabric. Then I will remove that target and write down the material and the thickness on that target, and then I'll post another target and repeat that 5-shot test with the next thickest fabric. Keep repeating those tests using thicker strips of fabric until your fabric is so thick that it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to start in the barrel. So now you can look at those targets and you can choose by the size and shape of the group which fabric produces the best accuracy in your gun. Now when you've discovered that, go back to that fabric store and buy enough of that fabric to last a good long while. Also, I would recommend that you keep the receipt and make sure that the lot number for that bolt of fabric is written down on that receipt. So when you run out, you can go back and find that same fabric again without having to spend hours in the store measuring every bolt of fabric with your micrometer. So now you've completed the first series of tests. You've discovered what charge of powder your rifle shoots best, and you have discovered the thickness of patching that produces the best accuracy. The final step is discovering the type and amount of lubrication that your patches need. Now, I spent years of frustration trying all the commercially available patch lubricants that I could find on the market. I've tried all the combinations of animal fats, olive oils, beeswax, lip balm, and never been satisfied with the results. One particular rifle I had simply refused to shoot groups at all until I had cleaned out all of the lubricant that was left in the bores. The problem with these lubricants is, one, it's difficult to lubricate your entire strip of fabric consistently the same. But the biggest problem I found is that most of those concoctions left a built-up film inside the bore of the rifles. Now, if your rifle happens to shoot that stuff well, you know, I'm happy for you. Go ahead and use it. But I'm going to suggest that you just skip all of that and go to what I have found is the most effective and the most accurate cleaner and lubricant, and that's Ballistol. Now, you can use this for lubricant and rust prevention. You can use it to mix up a batch of your black powder solvent, otherwise known as moose milk. But its best use is as a patch lube. Now, it may sound like an oxymoron, but this is a mineral oil that dissolves evenly and mixes well with water. And the way that I use this to control the amount of lubricant in my patching is I start with a glass container and a lid, and I'll measure out 1 ounce of Ballistol and pour it into that container. Typically, I use a small measuring cup like you might use to measure liquid medicine, like cough medicine. So I put 1 ounce of oil in that jar, and then I add 3 ounces of water. I mix that up, and I take a strip of the best patching material, and I soak it in that mixture. Now, this fabric will absorb only so much of that mixture until it's fully saturated. Then you squeeze the excess out into the jar, and you lay this strip of fabric out flat on a non-porous surface to dry. Now, what happens is the water will evaporate away and leave only the oil in the fabric, and it's distributed equally throughout that entire strip of fabric. So I would mark that strip 3-to-1. And then I would add another ounce of water to that container, making a mix of 4 ounces of water to 1 part oil. Again, soak a strip of your best patching in that, lay it out flat to dry, and mark it 4-to-1. Now, continue to add an ounce of water and soak a strip of patching for 5-to-1, and continue until you reach a mixture of 8-to-1, perhaps even 9-to-1. Just be sure and mark those fabric pieces so you know which is which. Now go back to the range. Start with the piece of fabric with the most oil. That's the 3-to-1 mix. Load your best powder charge and those balls you sorted by weight, and shoot a 5-shot group on target. Mark on that target your water to oil mix, 3-to-1. Then post a new target. Load the next strip of fabric, that's 4-to-1. Continue to do this until the patching is so dry that you can't get it started easily in the bore. At that point, you'll see those groups start to open up again because you've had to pound the ball out of round to seat it on the powder charge. Now look at those targets, and you'll see the size and shape of your groups becoming smaller and rounder until you reach a point where the patching fabric is just too dry and your groups begin to open up again. Choose your best group considering how difficult it might have been to start that load. Now, if I'm shooting strictly in competition, I'll use a tight-fitting load if it's the one that puts all the bullet holes in one spot, even if I have to use a rubber mallet and a specially made short starter to start it. But that doesn't work very well for me in the field when I'm hunting. So I'm willing to make a little compromise between accuracy and ease of loading for my hunting load. Typically, I find a very accurate well grouping load that I can still start in the muzzle with my short starter and just 1 or 2 whacks with palm of my hand. Now, since I like to hunt and shoot competition, I don't want to be changing my load in any way or having to change my sight adjustments when I use the same gun for both purposes. So you may want to make a little bit of a compromise between accuracy and ease of loading. But I guarantee that this method of water-soluble oil will produce the most accurate loads in your rifle. Now I'm showing you 2 different targets. The first was shot with one of my 54 caliber rifles before I started load development. The second target was shot with that same rifle and from the same distance after completing the load development. I think you will agree that it's worth the time and the effort involved to work through this load development process. So to my friends who think weighing round ball and measuring fabric with a micrometer is a waste of their time, well, I'll just let these targets speak for themselves. Now these targets are not an anomaly. This is very typical of the difference in the group sizes I get from all my black powder guns. All the rifles respond to this. Your pistols will respond to it. In fact, I'll show you a photograph of a target I shot with my Percussion pistol in a rendezvous match. On that target, there are 6 shots in that group, and it was shot from offhand. Now, since I don't hunt with my pistols, I lubricate those patches with saliva, and I think you will agree that that works quite well. The advantage to using the water-soluble oil is, unlike saliva, it won't dry out if your load sits in the barrel for a length of time. For example, if you load your gun early in the morning and you don't get a shot until later in the afternoon, that saliva in that patch can dry out. The other disadvantage to saliva lubrication is during the winter time it can freeze. This oil, you won't have either of those issues. You can leave it loaded all day long and it's still going to be consistent in the amount of lubrication and the amount of friction produced in that bore. So for hunting and for most of my competition shooting with the guns that I hunt with, I strictly use the Ballistol water combination for patch lube. Now, I've even had good results applying this same method to my smooth bores when I shoot those with a round ball. So I highly recommend that you just skip all those commercial available lubricants, the Crisco, all the magic concoctions that everybody promotes, and just go straight to the Ballistol and the water-based lube.